The National Electrical Code, or NEC, addresses the installation requirements for electrical equipment and clearances around service disconnects. The code does not explicitly prohibit mounting anything directly under a service disconnect, but it emphasizes maintaining adequate working space and clearance for safe operation and maintenance. Several sections of the NEC are relevant to this topic. NEC Section 110.26 addresses spaces about electrical equipment. It mandates sufficient access and working space for all electrical equipment operating at 600 volts, nominal or less to ground. This working space includes minimum depth, width, and height requirements to allow personnel to safely operate and maintain the equipment. The depth of the working space is dependent on the voltage to ground and the condition of the installation. Condition 1 exists where there are exposed live parts on one side and no grounded parts or grounded parts suitably guarded on the other side of the working space. Condition 2 exists where exposed live parts are on one side and grounded parts are on the other side. Condition 3 exists where there are exposed live parts on both sides of the working space. For example, for equipment operating at 151 to 600 volts, the minimum clear working space depth for condition 1 is 3 feet, for condition 2 it is 3.5 feet, and for condition 3 it is 4 feet. The width of the working space must be at least 30 inches or the width of the equipment, whichever is greater. The height of the working space must be at least 6.5 feet or the height of the equipment, whichever is greater. NEC Section 230.9 addresses clearances for service conductors. It specifies the minimum clearances that service conductors must maintain from ground, buildings, and other objects. While this section primarily focuses on overhead service conductors, it reinforces the general principle of maintaining safe clearances around electrical equipment. NEC Section 230.70a states that the service disconnecting means shall be installed at a readily accessible location either outside of a building or structure or inside nearest the point of entrance of the service conductors. This requirement ensures that the service disconnect can be quickly and easily accessed in case of an emergency. Mounting equipment directly under a service disconnect could potentially obstruct access to the disconnect, violating this requirement. Several factors must be considered when determining whether it is permissible to mount equipment directly under a service disconnect. Firstly, the type and size of the equipment being mounted. Small, lightweight items may not pose a significant obstruction, while larger, heavier equipment could impede access to the disconnect and create a safety hazard. Secondly, the available working space around the service disconnect. If there is ample working space that meets the requirements of NEC Section 110.26, mounting equipment underneath may be acceptable. However, if the working space is limited, mounting equipment underneath could further restrict access and create a code violation. Thirdly, local codes and regulations. Local jurisdictions may have additional requirements or restrictions regarding the installation of electrical equipment. It is important to consult with the local electrical inspector to determine whether mounting equipment under a service disconnect is permitted in a specific location. In summary, while the NEC does not explicitly prohibit mounting anything directly under a service disconnect, it emphasizes maintaining adequate working space and clearance for safe operation and maintenance. Consider the type and size of the equipment, the available working space, and local codes and regulations before mounting anything under a service disconnect. Always prioritize safety and compliance with the NEC. Here are some examples to illustrate the principles. If a small junction box is mounted directly under a service disconnect in a residential setting, and there is still ample working space and access to the disconnect, it may be acceptable. However, if a large panel board is mounted directly under a service disconnect in a commercial setting and it obstructs access to the disconnect and reduces the working space below the minimum requirements, it would likely be a code violation. If there is a situation where mounting equipment under a service disconnect is unavoidable, consider these strategies to mitigate potential problems. Firstly, raise the service disconnect. If possible, raise the service disconnect to provide more clearance underneath. This can create more space for mounting equipment without obstructing access to the disconnect. Secondly, use a smaller enclosure. Choose a smaller enclosure for the equipment being mounted. This can minimize the obstruction and maintain adequate working space. Thirdly, offset the equipment. Offset the equipment to one side of the service disconnect. This can provide easier access to the disconnect and maintain the required working space. Remember that electrical codes are put in place to protect people and property. Always consult the latest edition of the NEC and local codes for specific requirements in a given jurisdiction.